Hi, I'm Gregg Kofi Brown. I'm a session musician and I've worked as a frontman and general entertainer, actor, somewhat dancer, mover. I've worked with Joe Cocker, Eric Burden, OSIBISA, Hanoi Rocks, the Members, and so many more artists that I will endeavor to share with you. My first musical experience was at 5 years old in Anchorage, Alaska, where my mother came and got me from Memphis to take me up because she just got married. And my sister and I were gathered from Memphis and taken up to Alaska, where I had my first piano lesson. Unfortunately, the piano teacher, for every wrong note that I hit, I got a crack against my knuckles with a ruler. So that kind of put me off piano a bit. And I developed, I think, an innate yearning to play guitar because I remember seeing Elvis Presley singing "You Ain't Nothing But a Hound Dog." And I grabbed my mother's broom and started pretending like I was Elvis Presley. He was an immense influence, as well as the Everly Brothers. I remember singing "Dream" when I was a young lad. So moving forward, my early life was centered around two places that I grew up. Firstly, I was born in Memphis, Tennessee, and I used to travel. As I was growing up, I'd spend a year or two in Memphis and go to a place called Riverside, California, because when my mother was in Alaska, she married an Air Force sergeant who was then stationed at March Air Force Base. And we lived in Riverside for most of our lives. The family has a really strong connection with Riverside. So I used to go back and forth between Riverside and Memphis, which culturally was amazing because Memphis, of course, as you know, had Beale Street, and it was the home of soul and the blues. Stax Records was based in Memphis, Tennessee. People like Isaac Hayes, Rufus Thomas, Carla Thomas, Al Green, so many amazing soul and blues artists lived in Memphis and came through Memphis. B.B. King and Elvis, as portrayed in the movie about Elvis recently, they were very close and they hung out in Memphis. So I would travel between Memphis and Riverside. So Riverside, again, being the home of the guy who created the electric guitar, Paul Both, and that whole scene, Riverside, was another melting pot of music like Memphis, because so many different artists came through Riverside. And there was this strong element of amazing guitar players that came from that area and indeed were exported from Riverside. So many, and I will touch upon the few that I know during the course of this interview. My first musical journey, I remember, was singing in the church, singing gospel music in Memphis, and also singing Latin choral singing because I was baptized as a Catholic. So I went to school in the Catholic school in Riverside and in Memphis. And I remember hours and hours of singing in Latin, singing choral songs in Latin, and also hours of practicing and singing in my local neighborhood gospel Christian Baptist church. So again, this is very important because the information that I would have gotten from the Catholic choral singing was mainly attuned to classical music. The gospel learning that I got was more attuned to soul and blues and just raw emotional expression. So both of these elements were very important to me in growing up and really informed me as a performer, a songwriter, and a musician. I remember singing on the corner with my cousins in Memphis, doing doo-wop, singing in harmonies, learning about the different, bass, baritone, tenor, first tenor. And again, this was very informative. This was something that would take me through to my life up to now when recording songs, because not only would I be when I worked as a session musician, as a session bassist, not only would I be hired as a bass player, but a lot of times they would want my vocal, me to be maybe to sing backing vocals, and on occasion arrange the vocals, backing vocals, and contract backing vocal singers for different projects. So this background was very important in forming and a great basis for my career as a musician. I remember the influence in Memphis, besides having the soul and blues influence, it was a strong influence. We loved the Beatles. Whereas in Southern California, there was Motown was very popular. Surf music, Dick Dale and the Surf Tones, and also the very first single I bought that I heard that I had to have, desperate to have this song, was I Can't Get No Satisfaction by the Rolling Stones. I was 14, heard it on the radio. Somebody was driving me, picked me up from school, and I said, stop the car. I got out of the car, ran straight to the record shop, and bought that single. So I would say the Beatles and the Rolling Stones were a big influence, along with everything else, And moving on, my first band was in Riverside. We lived in the east side of Riverside. So we had a band called the East Side Loop. And again, it was kind of a soul band. I was playing bass, and we had another bass player to play bass when I went up front to sing. So I was a bass player, but also the lead vocalist. That was we did sock hops, we did graduation parties, and I also had a band with a guy by the name of Greg Schaefer. They called him Little Guitar. And he played in a band called Bacon Fat, which was produced by British producer Mike Vernon, who produced John Mayall and the Blues Breakers, Fleetwood Mac, Peter Green. And again, remember that name, because that's going to be another name that I would refer to in this piece. Yes, so Little Guitar, Greg Schaefer, and I had a band, we were very influenced by Jeff Beck, Led Zeppelin, those kind of bands during that time. But again, Gregg was known as a really amazing blues guitarist. He was 15 years old, you know, and I mean, he toured, when he came and played Ronnie Scott's, I think he was 15, and Mike Vernon loved him. So my next journey was when I was in college. I was hired to be a social, I was entertainment director, actually, entertainment director. So I was in charge of promoting concerts on the college campus. We had 10,000 day students, and I think maybe another 10,000 night students. It was a huge campus. The first concert that I did, I had a budget of, I think, $10,000, something like that, a year to do things. And I set up Saturday, Friday afternoon concerts for the student union. One of the first concerts I did, well, the first big concert I did was with Elton John. It was his first big concert for, you know, because I think at this point he'd only been playing clubs. And I promoted this concert at Landis Auditorium at Riverside City College, and we had 1,500 people there, and it was amazing. They made, I let some veterans, Vietnam veterans in, who were connected with one of the agents that I had. And I allowed them to sneak in some recording equipment in their wheelchairs where they were recorded the album, a bootleg album of Elton John. And it's called Country Comforts. Now, Elton John lists this album on his discography, but he says it was recorded in Santa Monica, but it was actually recorded in Riverside. And at the end of the concert, you can hear my voice saying, Elton John, ladies and gentlemen, Elton John. It was an amazing concert. My dean, the dean of college, the assistant dean of the college, congratulated me. And he said, what an amazing concert. And he said, I didn't even mind some of the audience smoking the wacky backy, the, you know, marijuana or whatever. But did they have to stub it all on the carpet? Did they have to, you know, put the joints out on the carpet, you know? But it was a big success. And it gave me a reference to how one part of the music industry works. Because in my career, it was very important for me to, as well as work on my music and have chops to be able to play and sing, but it was very important to know about the music business because of the fact that so many musicians were getting ripped off and still are to this day, that does not understand the aspects of the music business. So it gave me an informed information on how the business ran. I took a hiatus from college and went up to Alaska and joined a band. I took an upright bass with me so I could practice. And I was up there for about 6 months, 7 months. Then I came back to LA. I was supposed to finish college, but I dropped out just before my senior year and moved to LA to try to make it in the music business, you know. And that was a struggle, you know, it was a struggle, but I joined the band and we had backing from from some managers. We had played in a soul band, and I had this Longhorn bass, a Burns bass guitar, Longhorn. We called it the pocket bass. And so that's what I had when I joined the soul band. And the managers looked at me and said, what's this bass, man? He said, you need to be playing a Fender bass, a Fender Precision. So they went out and bought me a Fender, a Fender Precision. So that was my first. I didn't even have a case for it, but they went out and they bought me my first Fender. And this was, again, it was another type of learning that I achieved whilst playing with this singing group. Such things as dynamics, band dynamics, breaking the band down when the singers are singing, bringing the vibe back up, the music, climax of a song. So this was very important, and we played all the kind of California, what they call the chitlin circuit. Now, chitlins is a slave food that black people ate in the South. It was hog intestines, pig intestines. And obviously now there's a big drive not to eat pork amongst certain factors of the black community. But we had these black clubs called the chitlin circuit, and we played the chitlin circuit. And I got offered a gig with Johnny Guitar Watson. But at the same time, let me back up just a second. During my stay in LA, I went through a challenging month where I lost my girlfriend, I lost my flat, and I had to spend one night in my car. But the next night, I went to a friend's house just to have a jam and play some blues, because Christ knows I had the blues. And he received a phone call. Somebody was looking for a bass player. And the guy that they were looking for wasn't there, but I was. So he said, well, Gregg's here. And so I was bundled up in a car and taken from North Hollywood to somewhere in Santa Barbara. And I met this guy named Joe Cocker, this amazing English soul singer who was, he world famous musician even then, singer. So that was the gig. I went out, I learned the songs. He was my roommate, him and his girlfriend. That was weird. But we got on famously, Joe and I. I think I did 12 dates touring America. It was the first tour I ever did. But I couldn't handle all the periphery stuff that came with touring in a rock and roll band. They said sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Now I can handle the sex, I can handle the rock and roll, but the drugs were new to me. And I remember snorting my first line of cocaine, and it just freaked me out. I couldn't even practice. They said, "Oh, Gregg, just rest." I said, "Poor guy, man. He's a newbie." I mean, I think there's a guitarist. The guitarist in that band he played with the Everly Brothers. I can't, his name will come to me. But that was a very strange time. Anyway, I learned the songs. We did the tour. And again, I couldn't handle all the partying and alcohol and drugs. Joe was throwing up backstage. He'd sing some songs and he'd go, we're in the middle of a concert, and he'd go puke in the back of the stage and then come back and finish. It was so weird. We were in New Orleans, and I got drunk one night, and but I sat in with this band, some of the members from a band called White Trash, Edgar Winter and Johnny Winter's kind of group of musicians, and they were amazing. And Joe Cocker's band came in. I said, "Come on, guys, come on! These guys are great." You know, they were afraid to sit in with these guys, and I slipped. Oh, what a bunch of. And I said that over the microphone. So I got sacked the next day. Joe came to me in tears and said, "Gregg, why did you do that?" He says, the band, they want to sack you, and there's nothing I can do, you know. So I said, "Joe, don't worry about it." And I just chalked it up. I was, you know, like I said, it was my first time. There was a lot of aspects of the sex, drugs, and rock and roll thing I had to come to terms with. So, but the good thing is, while I was on tour, I met a guy named Conrad Isidore, who was a drummer from London, West Indian drummer. And he had played on Joe Cocker's Mad Dogs and Englishmen tour. So he became a friend, and more importantly, he became a mentor. And I became friends with his brother, Reggie Isidore, who played with Robin Trower. He did Robin Trower's first two albums, Robin Trower from Procol Harum. And he also recorded with Peter Green. So Reg and I became playing partners, a rhythm section, and we did a lot of jamming. We didn't do any gigs, but we did a lot of jamming together, maybe the odd gig. So through Reg, I met Mike Vernon. He took us all out to dinner one night. And this was like a week, 2 weeks after I gotten sacked from Joe Cocker's band. So we went to this amazing restaurant off Sunset Boulevard, and Mike Vernon said, "Oh, by the way, Eric Burton's looking for a bass player." And I said, "Oh, I'm available." He says, I'll tell him, you know. So I was given an audition for Eric Burton. I passed the audition. They said, "Okay, you got the gig." But they were still auditioning bass players. And one day, you know, one of my favorite heroes turned up, a guy named Spartacus R., who played in a band called OSIBISA. Now remember this, because that's gonna, 10 years from then, there's gonna be a story. But I helped him plug up the bass, and you know, and he auditioned, and that was fine. He was my hero. I met him. I think I met him before, and obviously, I had the gig. But one day, I think there was a guitarist named Alon in the band, and the drummer Alvin Taylor was also playing drums in the band. Now Alvin was amazing because he had done sessions with Ike and Tina Turner, George Harrison's 33 1/3, he's on that album. Bill Withers, you know, he was a very amazing songwriter. And back up, he was in a band that I hired from Palm Springs called American Eagle. He was playing drums for that band, who was a support band for the Elton John concert that I put on, along with Gene Redding, Otis Redding's cousin. So it turned out that, you know, I had inadvertently given, you know, Alvin Taylor a gig. So we're still close today, to this day. But one day, another bass player came by, and I smoked a joint with Alon. I was a little bit stoned. I plugged him up. And this guy was amazing. He was like Jimi Hendrix on the bass. And he had played with Jeff Beck. His name was Tim Bogart. You know, Beck, Bogart, and a piece. They had a band together. He was like amazing, and I was stoned, and I just thought, no way I'm keeping this gig after that guy's playing. So I packed up and went home. And the management company called, "Gregg, why did you leave rehearsal?" You know, I said, "Well, I thought I had the sack." He said, "No, it's you know, you're still on salary. Get your ass back here to rehearsal." So, and it was amazing because all these amazing bass players came through, but I still had the gig. There must have been something about me that they liked. That was beyond my bass playing. And I think when I was in the band and we were touring, it was an amazing, Eric Burton was just such an amazing person. And he had some amazing stories, you know, some of which I dare not say. But he was an amazing guy. And he always used to look at me and said, Gregg, what are you doing playing bass for me? You're a blues musician. You should be out there playing the blues, you know. It's just something and he wasn't the first artist to say that to me. I just wanted to be a funk bass player, but everybody else saw me as a blues man for some reason. So I kept that gig for a long time, and I met one piano player that joined our band was a guy named John Rabbit Bundrick. He was an amazing musician. He had played with Johnny Nash, and he did Bob Marley's first album, Catch a Fire. Him and Bob Marley were Johnny Nash's songwriters. He also played in a band called Free, which was one of my favorite bands from England. He was from Texas, and he was an amazing guy. We had a ball on the road. You know, it was awesome. Another guy joined us during the middle part of the tour. His name was Snuffy Walden. Snuffy went on to write, to become a TV music writer. He did Ally McBeal. He did so many television shows. Look him up, Nashville. He did so many shows. So those were my first tours ever. You know, I mean, I'd done the Chitlin circuit, but a national tour. My first tours with British artists, Joe Cocker and Eric Burden. So when that tour finished, I hooked up with some guys I'd had a band with in college called Shango, and we got a house in LA, and we started gigging a lot of Air Force bases, a lot of Chitlin circuit gigs. But we were shadowed by music management from Motown. One management brought another guy to join our band briefly, a guy by the name of Paul Sabu. And he was the son of Sabu, the actor who did the Jungle Book. He did so many famous movies in the 40s. Paul became a producer, but he was an amazing guitarist. So at this point, I was very close to Reggie Isidore, who ended up going on tour with Jimmy Witherspoon and so many different artists that he worked with. He moved back to London to concentrate on his career. I joined a program that I got to learn about musical comedy theater, and a very famous mentor took me under his wing by the name of Ernie Glucksman. But before I get into that, let me back up a minute. Another few people that I met through my Joe Cocker and I getting into the LA music session scene. There was a guy named Fuzzy Samuels who played with Stephen Stills' Bonanza's band. And he also played with Linda Ronstadt. He played with Crosby, Stills and Nash. And to this day, he's still a mentor and a friend. And his wife at the time was P.P. Arnold, who was a well-known singer. She came to England with Ike and Tina Turner. She was an Ikeette. And then she signed with Mick Jagger's record label. And, she started having hits in England and Europe. And again, she's still a friend. And these were people that were mentoring young musicians like myself. So, as one struggled to find success in that maze of musical activity in LA, I went through a challenging period where I had to live with my mom temporarily, and somehow I landed this part-time gig as an assistant apartment manager, which was great because I got a flat. I got an apartment, a free apartment. Perfect. And at the same time, my sister showed me this ad where they were looking for musicians and potential actors. And I went and I got the job. And the job was working as a musician and an actor and being mentored by older musicians and actors. And I got paid for it. And the guy who ran the course was Ernie Glucksman. Ernie Glucksman was Jerry Lewis's manager and producer. Jerry Glucksman produced a movie called The Nutty Professor and The Bellboy for Jerry Lewis, who was a very well-known actor, comedian. Ernie Glucksman loved me. Ernie Glucksman wanted me to be a movie star or television star. And when he died, bless him, he left me all these scripts from this TV show he worked on called Laugh-In, all the Jerry Lewis scripts, all the gags, jokes, everything that he'd written. So my pathway was to do 6 months of comedy. This was the pathway of one pathway to get into acting in Hollywood. I was to do 6 months of comedy, stand-up, and then go right into television or film. That was the pathway. But at the same time, just before I started on that, Reggie Isidore, the drummer who played with Robin Trower and Peter Green, he called me and said, "Gregg, I've got, a management deal for you in London if you want to come here and start a band." So the choice was stay in LA and become a movie star, or go to London and become a musician. And stupid me, I loved the idea of going to London, and I think I made the right choice. Although I probably would have been a millionaire if I stayed in LA, if I had lived. But I decided to come to London. And I met his little brother, Gus Isidore. And Gus would go on to play with people like Seal. By the time he was 14, he had recorded with Mark Bolan. So again, that was another long-time musical influence and friend. And I became part of the Isidore family. I used to go to their mother's house every Sunday for dinner. And, Reg was like a brother. Gus, Conrad, again, they were family. They still are. I mean, Reggie and Conrad are rest in peace. But, their spirit's still with me. And Gus is still alive. The family accepts me as one of them. So that was very informative for my early years. My move to London, again, I kept my head down. I went from playing with a band with Reggie Isidore and Gus Isidore. Robin Trower came and stole Reggie out the band again to play on an album called Truce that he did with Jack Bruce and Robin Trower. And Gus went on onto his musical journey, and Peter Green asked me to put a band together for him, which I did, and we played together for about a year. But then that became very political, and a tug between me and the percussionist, and I wasn't in it for that. So I had a challenging 2 months where I went deaf. One aspect of moving to London was dealing with the cold weather, because I grew up in a semi-tropical environment. Memphis is semi-tropical, but very damp. But Riverside was amazing because it was semi-tropical, but dry. I lived in the upper desert. LA's dry, Riverside. LA's a little bit humid, but still it was semi-tropical. So to come to London, which is very damp and cold, it affected me. But there's always a positive side, which was the music and the culture. So when I got through this, being deaf in one ear and my ears cleared up, I found myself with no gigs, and all of a sudden I got called to do a session for a band called OSIBISA. And I loved OSIBISA. Me and my mates, our favorite bands were, when we were teenagers, were OSIBISA and Santana. That kind of African, Latin, rhythmic sound. So I did the session playing bass with OSIBISA. I did 2 songs. Teddy Osei, the leader of the band, asked me if I think about 2 weeks later, called me, would I be interested in joining the band and going on tour? I said, sure. So I started, on a musical journey with OSIBISA. I was still doing sessions. I did sessions for a band called Hanoi Rocks, a Finnish rock band that would go on to be quite a cultish band. And their catalog was bought by Guns N' Roses, who they influenced. I wrote and produced 3 songs for Hanoi Rocks. I also went and played with a band, the singer from a punk band called The Members, Nick Tesco. We put a band together with a New York rapper by the name of J. Walter Negro. And our band name was the Negro and Tesco Organization, which was NATO. So, but yeah, I was still doing sessions, and while working with OSIBISA, I worked with African artists. I did an album for Nigeria's Independent. I did a Ghanaian soul singers album. I was still working and doing sessions, and I signed a publishing deal with Chapel Music, and I recorded my first single with, again, remember where I'm from. I was born in Memphis, raised in Memphis and Riverside. My first single in London was produced by Isaac Hayes, none other than the famous Isaac Hayes that Black Moses, Hot Buttered Soul, Shaft. He was living in London. He lived in London for about a year. He produced my first single, and there's another story from that.